Jungkook's shocking outburst during a live broadcast leaves ARMY speechless. After Jimin reveals something no one saw coming, what happened next shook the fandom. "Don't pretend you loved him more than I did." The sentence cut through the live broadcast like shattered glass. The studio lights suddenly fell 10 degrees hotter. Jimin's voice, though low, echoed louder than anything said that night. It wasn't part of the script. It wasn't rehearsed. And for a moment, the entire world watching paused, unsure if what just happened was real. Jungkook's eyes widened, not with confusion, but disbelief, rage, betrayal. "What did you just say?" he growled, his mic picking up the shake in his voice. The show's host looked between them, nervous laughter bubbling in his throat but never making it out. Cameras kept rolling. Fans across the globe were glued to their screens, comments flooding the chat, hearts racing, breaths held. Jimin didn't look away. He didn't flinch. His gaze was cold, glassy, as if he'd finally decided to lift a curtain that had been hiding the truth for far too long. "I said, don't act like your pain was deeper than mine. You weren't the only one who lost him." The tension in the room became unbearable. One could almost hear the hum of the camera rigs, the faint buzz of studio equipment, and the pounding of Jungkook's heart that he swore was loud enough for the world to hear. His hands curled into fists on his lap, knuckles white. For a brief second, the image of Taehyung flashed in his mind, laughing, walking beside him that night, unaware it would be their last honest conversation. But Jimin, sitting there so composed, made it sound like he'd held a different version of the same memories. One Jungkook had no idea about. One that made his own grief feel like a counterfeit copy. "You never told me," Jungkook said, his voice cracking with both fury and hurt. "You never told me you were there." That night, Jimin blinked slowly, the corners of his lips barely moving. "You never asked?" The audience was silent. No laughter, no applause, no cues, just raw silence. The kind that stretches across continents through fiber optic cables and into the hearts of fans watching, mouths agape, fingers frozen above keyboards. Jungkook stood. The producers in the control room scrambled, switching cameras, unsure whether to cut or let it unfold. A single red light blinked on top of camera 3, tracking Jungkook's every move. He didn't care. "You think you're the only one with guilt, Jimin?" His voice cracked like thunder in the tight space. "You've carried this for a year and decided to drop it now? Like a confession on some talk show?" His breathing was ragged. Sweat clung to his temples, his black jacket rumpled from the movement. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Maybe he hadn't. "I stayed silent," Jimin said, still seated, fingers intertwined in his lap. "Because if I told you everything, you would have broken, and I needed you strong." "You needed me strong?" Jungkook scoffed. "You needed me blind." Someone in the audience let out a stifled gasp. Another began to cry quietly. The weight in the room was suffocating. Behind the studio walls, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then harder, echoing against the roof. Like a metronome ticking toward a revelation neither of them could escape. "You lied to me," Jungkook whispered, shaking his head. "All this time, you let me grieve alone while you what? Held on to your own twisted truth?" Jimin's eyes glistened, finally blinking faster, his throat visibly tightening as he swallowed a lump of emotion. "Because I loved him differently. I loved him quietly. I loved him in a way that didn't need to be shared." Silence again. Jungkook's breath caught. He turned slightly away from the camera. His voice, however, boomed across the studio as if trying to fill the void Jimin's words created. "You don't get to say that." It was a scream. Raw, wounded, unfiltered. The kind of scream that echoed with a year of silence. The kind that came not from anger, but heartbreak so vast it had no place to go. Staff members off camera looked panicked. Someone moved forward, perhaps to stop the feed, but it was too late. The world had already seen it. The explosion, the truth. The fracture that had been quietly festering now laid open like a bleeding wound under the glare of studio lights. Jungkook walked off set, not briskly, not dramatically. He just walked, like a man who no longer had the energy to hold his pain together. The sound of his footsteps faded behind the curtain, followed by a backstage door slamming somewhere far beyond the reach of cameras. Jimin remained seated, unmoving, until his shoulders finally began to shake, and a single tear traced down his cheek. The host, now visibly pale, leaned forward and whispered something into his earpiece. The studio lights dimmed slightly. A producer raised his hand. The feed cut. Army's hearts dropped. Because what they just witnessed wasn't performance. It was truth. A truth that had been buried. And finally, painfully, unearthed. The night after the broadcast, the internet didn't sleep. Clips of Jungkook's eruption trended across every platform. Jungkook screamed, Jimin Confession Live, and Taehyung Truth hovered at the top of every search engine. Fan theories spiraled into a frenzy of speculation. Some called it scripted. Others called it betrayal. But those who truly knew the boys or thought they did recognized it for what it was. A fracture that had long been sealed under pressure and had finally shattered in public view. Inside the dorm Jungkook had returned to, the walls felt narrower. His jacket was thrown on the floor, and his phone, still buzzing with thousands of messages, lay face down on the hardwood. His chest heaved with every breath, but his throat remained tight, dry, wounded. He stared at the ceiling, not blinking, not thinking, just stuck. Taehyung's photo still sat on the bookshelf, framed, smiling, untouched since his funeral. And now, Jimin dared to say that he loved him more? He rose from the couch and walked over to the photo. His fingers brushed the edge of the frame. He wanted to scream again, but the pain had mutated. Now it was quieter, meaner. It whispered things instead of yelling them. What if Jimin had known all along? What if Jimin had been the reason he didn't get the last call, the last text? What if Jimin had taken that night away from him? His phone buzzed again. Reluctantly, he picked it up. A message from their manager. Let's talk. The company is preparing a statement. He scoffed. Of course they were. A statement. A neat little press release to clean up an emotional landmine. But then another message came in, this time from Jimin. Come to the studio tomorrow. I'll be there. No cameras, no staff. Just us. He stared at it. His thumb hovered above the screen. For a moment, he considered deleting it, ignoring it, blocking the number altogether. But a darker voice inside him whispered again. You want answers? Go get them. The next day, the studio was darker than usual. No stage lights, just the overhead fluorescents humming faintly. Jimin sat alone in the middle of the practice room, a single bottle of water beside him. He looked up as Jungkook entered. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence was suffocating. Jungkook closed the door behind him and didn't move. Jimin inhaled deeply. You didn't reply. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either, Jungkook replied coldly. Jimin stood slowly, rubbing his hands together nervously. I owe you an explanation. You owe me a lot more than that. I know. Jungkook's jaw clenched. He took a few steps forward. How long were you going to keep it from me? That you were with him the night before he couldn't finish the sentence. Jimin's eyes glistened, but he held his ground. I wasn't trying to hide it. I just didn't know how to say it without destroying everything. You didn't think that watching me grieve alone would be worse? You didn't think that maybe I needed that truth instead of lies? I didn't lie, Jimin said firmly. I just didn't tell the whole truth. Jungkook laughed bitterly. Is that how you sleep at night? Jimin's voice cracked as he finally broke. I was with him because he asked me to be. He didn't want you to know. He said he couldn't face you, not after what he did. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. What did he do? Jimin looked away. What did he do, Jimin? The room seemed to tremble. Jimin lowered his voice, almost in a whisper. He told me he was going to leave. Leave? Leave what? BTS. Korea. You. The word you hit Jungkook like a blow. His face twisted in confusion and fury. That's not true. He said he couldn't take it anymore. The pressure, the lies, the expectations. He felt like he didn't belong in the group anymore. That he was performing for a version of himself that didn't exist. No, he would have told me that. He would have talked to me. Jimin shook his head slowly. He tried. He left you a message. What message? A pause. He asked me to delete it. Jungkook lunged forward, his voice a roar. You did what? Jimin stumbled back, guilt exploding across his face. He begged me. He said if you saw it, you'd never let him go. That you'd fight him. That you'd blame yourself. He didn't want that for you. "I deserve that message," Jungkook shouted, his fists shaking. "I deserve to know. I thought I was protecting you." "No, you were protecting yourself." Jimin looked as though he'd been slapped. Jungkook turned, pacing like a caged animal. His thoughts came out like fire, too fast to process. "You watched me break. You stood by and gave me hugs and empty words and pretended you didn't have blood on your hands." "It's not blood," Jimin said softly. "It's grief." Jungkook spun around. "Then why does it feel like betrayal?" Jimin walked toward him. "Because you needed someone to blame. And now that you have me, maybe you'll finally start to heal." "I don't want to heal like this. Neither do I." They stared at each other, hearts pounding, tears threatening. For the first time since Taehyung's death, the two were truly alone with their guilt, their sorrow, their unspoken history. Jungkook's voice was hoarse. "Did he love you?" Jimin hesitated. Then finally, with a voice barely audible, he said, "Yes, but not the way you think." Jungkook frowned. "He loved me like family, like a shadow of his own reflection. But he loved you with a kind of fire that terrified him. That's why he ran." Jungkook collapsed onto the floor. His breath caught, his chest heaved. The sob he'd buried for months finally escaped his throat, raw and guttural. Jimin sat beside him without touching him. For minutes, they just sat in silence. And when Jungkook finally spoke, it was with a softness Jimin hadn't heard from him in a long time. "I would have given him everything." "I know," Jimin replied, his voice breaking. "So would I." Outside, rain began to fall again. Gentle, cleansing, like the universe giving them permission to feel, to rage, to grieve, together. Back online, the company had issued its official statement. The incident on last night's broadcast was an unplanned emotional moment between members. "We ask for the understanding of fans around the world." But fans weren't buying it. They had seen something real, something raw, something sacred and broken and tragically human. Some armies fought online. Others wept in silence. But all of them waited. Because everyone knew this was just the beginning. And whatever came next would change everything. The rain hadn't stopped since yesterday. Seoul seemed to grieve with them, its streets cloaked in a soft, persistent drizzle, its skyline veiled behind gray clouds that didn't move. For Jungkook, the weather mirrored his mind. Heavy, blurred, suffocating. He sat in his apartment, the same one he used to share with Taehyung for late-night songwriting sessions, spontaneous movie marathons, and whispered conversations that never made it to stage. The same room where laughter once echoed was now heavy with ghosts. His fingers hovered above his phone again. Not for messages, not for headlines. He wasn't ready to face the world's noise. No, his thumb rested just above the one thing that might still hold clarity: Taehyung's old voice recordings. The ones they used to send each other when words failed to land properly in text. He hadn't opened that archive in months. His heart pounded. Slowly, he tapped into it. Dozens of recordings. Some of them just laughter. Some of them Taehyung humming melodies. Others midnight thoughts recorded in secret, never meant to be heard aloud. Jungkook's breath caught as he scrolled to one labeled only with a date. March 27. The day before, everything changed. He pressed play. Taehyung's voice came through, soft and tired. "Hyung, Jungkook, I don't know if you'll ever hear this. Maybe I'm a coward for recording it. Maybe I just needed to say this somewhere." Jungkook froze. "I'm leaving. Not permanently, but I need distance. I can't breathe here anymore. Every time I walk into a room, I feel like I'm performing, even for you. And it's not your fault. You always saw me clearer than anyone else. Maybe that's what scares me most." The audio cracked faintly. Taehyung must have been walking. There was traffic in the background, distant horns. "I didn't tell you in person because I know you'd stop me. You'd beg me to stay. And I'd stay. I'd stay and suffocate. So this is me asking you not to look for me. Just let me go for a while." The silence that followed was worse than the words. Jungkook's throat tightened as the message ended. He replayed it. Again. And again. He never received that recording. Jimin had deleted it. Not hypothetically, not metaphorically. He had physically taken the phone from Taehyung's hand that night and erased it. The knowledge roared through Jungkook's skull like a fire alarm. What else had Jimin hidden? He stormed out of the apartment. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. His reflection in the mirror panel showed a man on the edge, eyes bloodshot, hair messy, jaw clenched tight. He didn't care. By the time he reached Hybe headquarters, security didn't even try to stop him. No one dared. His face, usually calm, sometimes teasing, was now thunder. The receptionist at the desk flinched as he passed. He didn't need directions. He knew where Jimin would be. Jimin sat in the rehearsal studio again, alone, just like yesterday. The same bottle of water sat untouched beside him. When he saw Jungkook, he didn't rise. "You listened to it," Jimin said softly. "You knew he sent it." "Yes." Jungkook's voice trembled with rage. "And you destroyed it?" "I told you he asked me to." "Don't you dare throw that excuse at me again." Jimin's eyes didn't leave his. "I was trying to save you." "By rewriting history?" "No, by giving you a version of it that wouldn't eat you alive." Jungkook's laugh was bitter. "You don't get to play God with my grief." "I wasn't playing anything," Jimin shouted suddenly, rising to his feet. "I loved him too. And you were going to fall apart. Don't you get that? I watched you after he was gone. I watched you spiral. I thought if you didn't hear that message, maybe you'd keep some light in your eyes. I lost everything when he died, Jimin. And you made sure I lost even more." Their voices echoed through the studio. Jimin's voice dropped. "If I could go back and change it, I would. But you have no idea what that night was like. What he said. What he asked of me. Then tell me." A long pause. Jimin inhaled, eyes blinking back the tears threatening to fall. "We were on the rooftop of the hotel." He looked calm, like he'd already let go. "He told me he left a voice message for you and that I had to delete it before he changed his mind. I begged him to tell you himself. He said he couldn't. Said he didn't want you to think he was abandoning you. He wanted to disappear without burden." Jungkook's fists clenched. "And you let him." "I didn't know what else to do. I would have stopped him." Jimin stepped closer. That's exactly what he was afraid of. They stared at each other, eyes brimming with pain and fury. But beneath the surface, something deeper, something ancient, still connected them. A bond too strong to break, even with the truth weaponized between them. Then came a knock. The studio door opened slightly, and their manager stepped in with a face pale as ash. "You two need to see this," he said, holding out a tablet. "It just leaked." Jungkook took it first. A video played. It was CCTV footage from the hotel rooftop, the night Taehyung died. The camera angle was wide, but clear. Jimin and Taehyung stood on the edge. They were talking. Taehyung looked serene, peaceful. Jimin was crying, desperately, shaking his head. Then Taehyung leaned forward and whispered something into Jimin's ear. Jungkook's hand trembled as he watched Jimin collapse into a sob, grabbing Taehyung's arm as if to anchor him to earth. Then the video glitched, seconds missing. And when it returned, Taehyung was gone from the frame. The internet had already exploded with theories. Where did he go? Why was there a gap? And what had he whispered? Jungkook looked at Jimin. What did he say? Jimin's lips pressed into a line. "I can't." "You will." Jimin turned away. "It wasn't meant for anyone else." Jungkook grabbed his shoulder. "What did he say?" Jimin didn't answer. The manager stepped forward. "Hybe wants you both to go silent. No press, no socials, nothing, until they clean this up." Jungkook turned to him with a fire in his eyes that could burn down buildings. "No, we're not hiding anymore." Jimin turned back slowly, eyes narrowing. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying we go live. Again, tonight." "Are you out of your mind?" "No. I'm finally sane," Jungkook replied. "This time, we tell the truth." Jimin hesitated. "You really think people are ready for that?" "No," Jungkook whispered. "But we are," the manager protested. The company covered it up," Jungkook snapped. "We both know it. That rooftop camera? The missing seconds? They knew." Jimin looked at him, realization dawning in his eyes. "You think they tampered with the footage?" "I don't think," Jungkook said darkly. "I know." And just like that, the enemy changed. It was no longer each other. It was the system that had buried them both. They weren't supposed to be here. Not again. Not in this studio. Not with cameras quietly blinking red in the shadows, broadcasting what was never meant to leave the room. The tension was unbearable, but it was no longer the kind that they could suppress with choreographed smiles or carefully crafted statements. This time, there was no script, no PR team, no hype executive standing off camera to signal them when to speak or when to swallow their truth. Jimin stared at the lens with his hands on his lap, eyes hollow but determined. Across from him, Jungkook leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, the fire inside him restrained only by the breath he took in just before the live stream went public. The counter began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And they were live. Jungkook didn't wait. If you're watching this, it means we're still allowed to speak, that no one's cut the feed yet, that the truth might still be louder than the machine trying to erase it. Jimin nodded slowly, his jaw tight. Jungkook continued. You saw what happened 2 nights ago. You saw me scream. You saw Jimin say something that shattered me. We spent the last 2 days digging up things that were never meant to see the light. And we've realized we're not just grieving a friend. We're grieving a lie. One that's been told to us and to you. Jimin's voice broke through, steady but sharp. This isn't about drama. This isn't about scandal. It's about Taehyung. And it's about what he tried to tell us before he disappeared. Jungkook glanced at him. And what they tried to bury. Jimin's fingers curled tightly into his sleeves. We have something to show you. He reached into the folder on the table and placed a USB stick onto the desk. It's all here. The original security footage. The audio recording Taehyung left that night. Internal messages between HYBE's legal team and the PR department. Documents instructing the staff to handle the narrative. Jungkook looked into the camera, the fury in his voice barely contained. They knew Taehyung didn't just disappear. They knew he was planning to leave the industry, and they erased it. The chat exploded. Thousands of armies flooded the comment section, some in disbelief, some in rage, others begging them to stop before it was too late. But Jungkook and Jimin didn't stop. They couldn't. Not anymore. Jimin's hands trembled slightly as he plugged the USB into the laptop. The screen behind them lit up with the restored footage. The full clip. No glitches. No missing seconds. Just the rooftop. The moonlight. The conversation. Jimin and Taehyung stood close. The latter's voice audible now. I can't live like this anymore, Taehyung said. It's not about you or Jungkook. It's the label, the secrets, the pressure to be perfect. Jimin tried to hold him. You're not alone. I am, when they treat me like a product. Taehyung looked directly into the rooftop camera, almost as if he knew he was being watched. Tell him. Tell Jungkook I never meant to break him. And then, with the calmness of someone who had already made peace with his choices, Taehyung walked off camera. There was no sound of footsteps. No crash. Just Jimin falling to his knees, sobbing, whispering, "Don't do this," again and again. The video ended. Silence engulfed the studio. Jungkook's voice, when it returned, was lower, thicker. He didn't die that night. He ran. Jimin looked at him. They made it look like he was gone, but he wasn't. The air cracked. What are you saying? Jimin asked slowly. Jungkook opened another file on the screen. A bank transaction log. This was sent to one of Taehyung's private accounts 3 weeks ago. A place only 2 people knew about. Jimin leaned in. His breath caught in his throat. It came from a HYBE shell company. Jimin's world tilted. He's alive? Jungkook nodded once. And HYBE knows. The live stream continued. The chat section now on fire with speculation, panic, hope, and disbelief. Jungkook leaned forward again. They made everyone think he died. They staged everything. The missing seconds in the video. The press releases. The funeral with a closed casket. It was all part of a cover-up. Jimin looked like he might be sick. Why? Because Taehyung had proof, Jungkook answered. Proof of financial manipulation, forged contracts, hidden clauses in our solo deals. He found it all, and they needed him gone before he could go public. Jimin swallowed hard. So they buried him. Not literally, Jungkook said bitterly. But they erased him. Jimin pushed away from the table and stood, pacing the small room. This can't be real. Are you sure? Jungkook's voice turned cold. They thought if they broke us down one by one, we'd turn on each other. They didn't count on this. Jimin faced him again. Then what now? We find him. The moment that sentence was spoken, everything shifted. The live stream was still active, the fans still watching, and the chat now filled with, "He's alive? Are they serious? Where is he?" Jungkook looked directly into the lens again. If anyone out there sees this, and you know anything about Taehyung's whereabouts, contact us. Not the company, not the press, us. The stream cut suddenly. Black screen. Silence. The studio lights flickered. Outside, in the hallway, footsteps thundered toward them. The door burst open. Security. Executives. Lawyers. Their manager. "What the hell did you do?" one of the higher-ups screamed. Jungkook stepped forward calmly. "We told the truth. You just broke your contract? You broke your humanity." Jimin stood beside him. "Go ahead. Sue us. You'll just make this bigger." The man's jaw clenched. "Do you realize what you've done to this company? To yourselves?" Jungkook didn't blink. "We don't care anymore." Within the hour, the media had picked up the stream before it was pulled. Clips spread like wildfire. Fan edits. Subtitles. Translations in 20 different languages. News anchors stumbled over facts they didn't understand, unsure whether to treat it as a scandal or an act of bravery. Hybe issued a counterstatement, calling it a deeply personal moment taken out of context. But no one was buying it anymore. Fans started digging. They found records. Old interviews where Taehyung hinted at feeling caged. A cryptic tweet that was deleted hours before his death. An airline receipt from Switzerland dated 2 days after he supposedly disappeared. The fandom had turned into an army again, but not of fans, of investigators. And somewhere, far from Seoul, in a quiet cabin surrounded by snow and silence, a man watched the broadcast on a cracked laptop screen. His hands trembled, his eyes filled. Taehyung stood. His time hiding was over. The cabin was too quiet. Taehyung sat on the edge of the wooden bed, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the flickering screen of the old laptop. The live stream had ended an hour ago, but the images replayed in his mind with terrifying clarity. Jungkook's voice, trembling, but fierce. Jimin's eyes, darker than he remembered. The truth, what they finally revealed. What they had both risked to unbury. He hadn't meant for them to find out. Not like this. Not with cameras. Not with millions watching. That wasn't the plan. It was never the plan. But plans fall apart when people start caring again. The snow outside whispered against the cabin walls, thickening with each gust of wind. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, the generator hummed a low, steady pulse. His phone, an old model, untraceable, disconnected from every network, sat lifeless on the windowsill. Taehyung hadn't turned it on in nearly 6 months. The day Hybe's threat became real was the day he vanished. He replayed the last few seconds of the broadcast. Jungkook's eyes were burning with the kind of grief only betrayal can feed. And yet, even through the screen, Taehyung could feel it, the love, the hurt love, the broken, confused, furious love that never really died, even when everything else did. Jimin. Oh, Jimin. Taehyung closed the laptop and exhaled deeply. They weren't supposed to suffer like this. He left, so they wouldn't. But Hybe twisted everything. They always did. He stood slowly, bones aching from the cold, and walked to the bathroom. His reflection startled him. The beard, the longer hair, the sunken cheeks. He looked nothing like the man fans remembered. He looked like someone who had spent too long in silence, too long in fear. He splashed cold water on his face. Then he turned on the phone. It buzzed violently. 312 unread messages. The screen filled with notifications, despite no SIM card. Emails, offline voicemails, encrypted apps. The first voice message was from Jungkook, recorded just after the live stream. "Hyung, if you're alive, if you're really out there, come back. You don't have to explain anything, just come back." The second message was from Jimin. "I kept your secret for as long as I could, but the weight, it crushed us all. I hope one day you'll understand." The third message made him freeze. It was from someone else entirely. "Mr. Kim, we know you're watching. If you go public, the consequences will be irreversible. You think your friends are safe. You think you've won. But we still control the narrative. We still own what you left behind." Taehyung's jaw clenched. They didn't own him. Not anymore. He packed only one bag. 2 hours later, he boarded a night bus towards Seoul, face hidden beneath a hoodie and a scarf. The driver didn't recognize him. No one did. That was the blessing of time, of facial hair, of silence. But in his heart, something had awakened again. The part of him that had died on that rooftop now breathed again. The city was still lit when he arrived. Seoul never truly slept. Cameras flashed in corners. Screens showed his old music videos, smiling faces, moments that once felt so honest. He kept his head down, walking through side streets, avoiding the security teams he knew Hybe had placed at all major points. He didn't go to the dorm. He didn't go to his old apartment. He went to the only place he knew would still be real Namjoon's house. The leader had left the group a year before everything collapsed. Quietly, gracefully. Rumors swirled, but no one ever confirmed anything. Namjoon had said he needed time. That was the truth, but not all of it. Namjoon opened the door at midnight. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just stared for a long moment, then stepped aside. Taehyung entered. They sat in silence for over 20 minutes. Namjoon finally spoke first. I knew they lied. Taehyung looked down at his hands. I didn't have a choice. You did, Namjoon said. You just made the one you thought would hurt the least. It didn't work. Namjoon poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs. It never does. The silence returned, but it wasn't hostile. It was old, familiar. I saw the stream, Namjoon said finally. They know, Taehyung nodded. They're in danger. They don't care. Taehyung rubbed his face. I do. Namjoon leaned forward. Then do something about it. The next morning, the world exploded. A single photo appeared on Twitter. Taehyung standing in front of Namjoon's door, blurry and distant but unmistakable. The scarf, the profile, the timing. Within minutes, Taehyung is Alive trended #1 globally. Fans screamed, cried, collapsed. Hybe denied it. The media scrambled. But by the afternoon, a press conference was called. Taehyung would speak. The hall was flooded with press, lights, cameras, and security. Jimin and Jungkook sat in the front row. They hadn't been allowed to talk to him yet. Hybe's lawyers controlled the flow of everything now, trying to spin the narrative. But then he stepped onto the stage. The room fell into a silence so pure it ached. Taehyung took the mic. His voice was steady. Good evening. He looked directly into the cameras. I am alive. The chaos began. Reporters screamed questions. Hybe execs began whispering, then shouting, then trying to end the stream. Taehyung didn't stop. I was forced to disappear. Not by my own will, not by my brothers, but by a system that silenced me when I discovered the truth. About our contracts, about the manipulation of our mental health evaluations, about the psychological abuse masked as branding. They thought if I vanished, the noise would end, but it didn't. He glanced toward Jimin and Jungkook. They carried my silence. They bled in it. He paused. I'm sorry. Tears filled his eyes. To them? To you? To myself? Hybe executives stood, trying to approach the stage. The mic was cut, but Taehyung was already crying, and so was everyone else, because the truth had already escaped. And no one could silence it now. There was no applause. The press conference ended in chaos. As Taehyung stepped away from the podium, microphones thrown in his face, cameras exploding with flashes, and security attempting to shield him from the wave of reporters, the atmosphere had shifted from curiosity to firestorm. His confession had done more than confirm what fans feared. It had sparked a war. Hybe moved quickly. Within 24 hours, the company released 3 official statements. The first labeled Taehyung's reappearance as a strategic manipulation of public sympathy. The second accused him of breaching multiple active contracts, including non-disclosure and defamation clauses. The third, perhaps most chilling, threatened to take appropriate legal action against all parties involved in the unauthorized disclosure of confidential materials. They didn't just threaten Taehyung. They included Jungkook. They named Jimin. They implied Namjoon. Jungkook's voice cracked with fury as he threw the folder across the dorm. They're trying to bury all of us now, one by one. Jimin, seated on the edge of the sofa with dark circles under his eyes, spoke without looking up. They've been preparing for this moment since the night you screamed. Jungkook paced. We thought we were exposing them, but we walked right into the game they wanted us to play. Now they can say we broke trust. We violated terms. We betrayed our own group. Jimin finally looked up. But we didn't. No, Jungkook said, his voice shaking. But they'll make it look like we did. Then the door opened. Taehyung stood there, breathless, with a small, hard case in his hands. Jungkook froze. Jimin rose slowly. 100 unspoken emotions tangled between the three of them. No words. Just 3 pairs of eyes full of history. Then Taehyung nodded once. "We're not done," he said quietly. "I have something they forgot I kept." The tension shifted like a tide. Jimin walked forward and slowly closed the door behind him. Jungkook said nothing, just stared at the case in Taehyung's hand. It looked unassuming. Black, plastic, scratched edges. But something in the way he held it like it burned made them understand. This wasn't just backup data. This wasn't just old rehearsal clips. This was the vault. They gathered around the dining table. Taehyung unlocked the case and pulled out a solid-state drive. No labels, no serials, no markings, just a red stripe across one side. Before I left, I knew I couldn't trust anyone, not even some of our own staff. So I started saving things, copies of internal emails, recordings of meetings, financial records. Some of it's encrypted, some of it isn't. But there's one file I never opened again, because I knew if I did, I'd never be able to sleep again. Jimin reached out and placed a hand over Taehyung's. "You don't have to go through it alone now." Jungkook stood behind them, eyes narrowed. Let's see what they didn't want the world to know. Taehyung connected the drive to Jimin's laptop. The screen flickered to life. Folders. Dozens. Titles like Mental Health Policy, Meeting, MP3, JJK, Contract, Redacted, PDF, and one that simply read, Black Room. Jungkook sat down. "Start there." Jimin hesitated. "You sure?" Jungkook's jaw clenched. "If it's what I think it is, I've waited long enough." Jimin opened the folder. Inside, 3 video files. No thumbnails, just timestamps. Taehyung whispered, "Those are the sessions they made you attend after the breakdown in 2022. Jungkook's eyes darkened. "You mean the sessions they said were therapy?" Taehyung nodded once. But they weren't. The first video began. A small, soundproofed room. No windows. A couch. A low table. A man in a gray suit, clipboard in hand, sat opposite Jungkook, who looked thinner, exhausted, vacant. The voice of the man was cold. "Your attachment to your members is impeding your professional boundaries." Jungkook in the video didn't speak. The man continued. "You exhibit signs of emotional dependency, particularly with subject code JM." Jimin leaned forward. "Subject code?" he whispered. The man's voice continued. "Your market value is projected to decline if your parasocial boundaries are not reinforced. We recommend limited exposure to internal emotional triggers." Jungkook in the video looked up finally. "Are you saying I shouldn't care about my brothers?" The man scribbled something. "We're saying caring has an expiration date." The video ended. Jungkook stood, fists trembling. "They tried to deprogram me." Jimin was pale. "They framed your grief as instability." Taehyung opened another folder. This one labeled, Performance Manipulation Us Tour. Inside, charts, analytics, and internal memos about how emotional suppression was scripted. Charts measuring fan response to specific expressions of sadness, accidental hand touches, and even scripted backstage tension to create viral content. Each file was a knife. Jungkook whispered, "They wrote our pain like it was a drama." Jimin exhaled slowly, rage simmering beneath his breath. "We lived it, and they commodified it." Then came the biggest file. V-Doc, MK6, Final Move, Taehyung Post. This is the meeting they recorded without consent. The day they decided I'd disappear. Jungkook's knuckles were white against the table. "Play it." The screen changed. A boardroom. 4 men. 1 woman. All executives. All with high badges. The woman spoke first. "The narrative surrounding Taehyung's erratic behavior can be redirected with a controlled exit." Another man nodded. "We lean into the mental retreat idea. A journey of self-discovery. No funeral. Just distance. Digital scrub." The third man added, "And if he resurfaces? We have enough footage to suggest he was unstable. The fans will sympathize, but they'll move on." Jimin stood slowly, shaking. "They plotted your erasure like it was a PR campaign." Taehyung couldn't speak. His body was stiff, face pale, eyes glazed. Jungkook walked away from the table. He pressed his palms to the wall, and then he screamed. A scream not from rage, but from a soul realizing it had been held hostage by people he once trusted. When the sound stopped, no one moved for a while. Then Taehyung closed the laptop. I'm leaking it all. Jimin turned to him. If you do that, there's no going back. I know. Jungkook turned around, eyes red. We go with you. Taehyung looked at both of them. For a moment, the three stood in silent agreement. Not as idols, not as public figures, but as brothers who had bled for a truth too long, buried. The next morning, the leak hit. Every file, every video, every voice, all released in one drop to an anonymous server mirrored in 7 countries. The fandom imploded. The industry trembled. Hybe's lawyers scrambled. But it was too late. The vault had been opened. And now, the world could finally see the truth behind the fame, the betrayal behind the stage, and the empire built not on dreams but on control. The internet never rests, but for the first time, it felt like the entire world had stopped to watch. Within 24 hours of Taehyung's leak, international headlines devoured the narrative like wildfire across a dry field. Major networks aired clips from the footage non-stop. Influencers reacted in real time. Experts were summoned to dissect every line, every chart, every disturbing revelation in the internal Hybe files. What began as fandom curiosity had evolved into a scandal shaking South Korea's entertainment industry at its very core. #erupted. Hybe exposed. Justice for BTS. Taehyung is right. But buried between millions of posts and furious threads was a quieter, more painful realization, something no army was prepared to face. Not all the members had spoken. Not all had stood with Taehyung, Jimin, and Jungkook. Not all stayed silent out of fear. Some stayed silent because they had something to lose. And some because they had already chosen a side. Namjoon was the first to see it. Then a fifth. I believe there is always a greater story behind what the public sees. I urge our fans not to judge without context. Hybe has been my home, and I have chosen to stand with them. The blood drained from Namjoon's face. He turned to the television. There, on national news, was Seokjin, seated in a carefully arranged studio, wearing a navy suit, the Hybe logo placed neatly in the corner of the screen. He looked calm, poised, like a man who'd already made peace with his decision. I understand my brothers are hurting, Seokjin said, but I believe this fight does not belong in the public eye. It belongs in quiet rooms, between people who know each other. Not cameras, not strangers, not hashtags. Jungkook saw it next. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The screen reflected in his pupils like a cruel joke written just for him. The man who had once told them, family means fighting even when it hurts, had chosen silence dressed as dignity. Jimin punched the wall. His knuckle bled. Taehyung's voice cracked as he said it aloud. He was the one who told me not to trust the board, Jungkook whispered. And now he's standing beside them. Namjoon called. His voice trembled. I warned him. I begged him not to speak. But they got to him, Kook. I don't know how. I don't know why. But he's not with us anymore. Jungkook hung up the call. Then he walked outside. Rain again. Always the rain. Like the sky couldn't take the weight either. The street was mostly empty, but a few cameras trailed him at a distance now. Not reporters, not professionals, just fans. Some cried when they saw him. Some bowed. Others just watched silently, as if they feared even breathing too loud would break him more than he already was. He didn't stop walking. He walked until the night swallowed the city behind him, and he ended up at the bridge, their bridge. The one he and Taehyung had crossed after their first win, where they swore they'd never let fame take their souls. Taehyung found him there an hour later. I didn't know about Jin, he said quietly. Jungkook didn't look up. I should have. Jungkook's voice was hoarse. He was always quiet, but not like this. Taehyung leaned against the railing beside him. They offered him something. Maybe security, maybe erasure, or maybe peace. Taehyung's breath caught. Jungkook looked at him. What if we're the ones still at war with ghosts? Maybe, Taehyung said. But that doesn't mean we let them rewrite our pain. A phone rang. This time, it was Jimin. His voice was ragged. There's something in the vault I didn't see before. Taehyung straightened. "What is it?" Jimin exhaled. "A letter." They met back at the dorm. The screen glowed softly. One file, named only "For Them." It was dated the night Taehyung vanished. Jungkook opened it. The letter was long and brutal, and written by someone who never got to say everything he needed to. Taehyung's voice trembled as he read it aloud. "To my brothers, if you're reading this, it means the world knows. It means the walls I helped build are finally crumbling. And I need you to understand why I left. Why I didn't say goodbye. Because if I had looked at your faces, I would have stayed. And if I had stayed, I would have died." Jimin sobbed quietly. Jungkook sat motionless. Taehyung kept reading. "They took pieces of me I didn't know I was giving. Smiles, gestures, memories. They filtered them, edited them, sold them back to me like souvenirs from a life I was still living. And every time I spoke up, I was told to be grateful. Every time I cried, I was told to be quiet. So I went silent, because silence was the only thing they couldn't brand. But I kept watching you. I kept loving you, even in hiding, especially in hiding." Jungkook's eyes glistened, his chest caving slowly like a house losing its roof. "I know some of you will feel betrayed. I know some of you won't forgive me. But please don't let them turn you into shadows. Don't let them take your truth. Even if I never come back, burn it all down if you have to, and rebuild it in your name." The screen dimmed. No one spoke. And then the door buzzed. A letter. From Hybe's legal team. An official summons. Jimin opened it with shaking hands. They were being sued. The number: 18 billion. The charge: breach of contract, corporate sabotage, emotional defamation. Taehyung stepped forward and took the paper. He looked at Jungkook, then Jimin. "Then let's make it worth it." The courtroom was colder than it needed to be. Jungkook sat between Taehyung and Jimin at the defendant's table, his knuckles tight around the edges of the wooden bench as he scanned the walls. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing into the back of his neck. Outside, hundreds of reporters swarmed the courthouse steps like vultures waiting for something to bleed. The entire city trembled beneath the headlines. "Hybe versus BTS members, a case that will define the industry." The words felt ridiculous, cruel even. How had it come to this? How had their name, once synonymous with unity and loyalty, been carved into opposite ends of a legal document? Jimin stared straight ahead, a sheen of sweat on his temples despite the chill. His breathing was shallow, his jaw locked. He hadn't slept. Neither had Jungkook or Taehyung. But Taehyung, he was different. He looked like a man who had already died once and come back. The weight he carried no longer bent him. It hardened him. His silence was sharper now, more deliberate. He wasn't just present. He was ready. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The courtroom doors clicked shut behind them like a coffin ceiling. "Court is now in session," the clerk announced. And just like that, their private war became public history. The prosecution was ruthless. Hybe had hired one of the most feared legal teams in the country, men and women who didn't blink, who smiled while slicing reputations open with surgical precision. The lead attorney, Mr. Kwon, looked like he hadn't blinked in 3 years. He adjusted his suit as he rose, voice calm and practiced. "We intend to prove that the defendants willfully violated confidentiality agreements, tampered with proprietary data, and orchestrated a media scandal that cost our client over 42 billion in valuation loss." He turned toward the jury. They didn't seek truth. They sought attention. Jungkook's heart punched against his ribs. When it was their side's turn, their lawyer, Miss Seo, stood with quiet fire in her eyes. "The truth doesn't violate contracts. It liberates them." Her voice was softer than Mr. Kwon's, but her words carried further. "We intend to prove not only that the defendants acted in good faith, but that Hybe itself engaged in systemic abuse, psychological manipulation, and corporate coercion designed to silence dissent and manufacture consent." The first witness was called, a former Hybe intern. Her voice trembled as she sat down, eyes darting toward the gallery as if someone was watching her even now, and maybe they were. She testified that she had seen altered footage before, that she'd overheard a manager joke about editing tears in post, that she'd once delivered sealed envelopes between legal and PR departments labeled Contingency Narrative T. Her voice cracked when she said it. "I thought it was about Taehyung's music. I didn't know it meant him." Mr. Kwon shredded her credibility on cross-examination, accused her of bitterness, of bias, of misunderstanding company language. But the damage was done. The seed was planted. The second witness was Hybe's own clinical psychologist. He denied everything, said the sessions were therapeutic, said Jungkook had been volatile, overwhelmed, and needed structure. Jungkook rose to his feet before he realized it. "I begged for help," he said loudly, eyes burning into the man. "I asked for someone to listen, and you gave me a checklist." The judge warned him to stay seated. Jungkook sat back down, jaw clenched, chest heaving. By the third day, the trial was a storm of exhibits, emails, broken trust, and whispers behind closed doors. Screenshots from group chats appeared on the monitors. Old rehearsal footage. Documents Jungkook hadn't even known existed, timesheets recording how long he'd been in a cry room. Charts detailing how often he smiled after interviews. "You are monitored like an algorithm," Ms. Seo said, "and manipulated accordingly." Jimin broke on the fifth day. He had been holding it together barely, but when a video was played of Taehyung's deleted therapy file, something inside him shattered. The voice in the clip was soft. Taehyung, talking in a whisper. "I keep feeling like, if I disappear, it'll finally stop. The noise, the cameras, the pretending. I wish I could just be V for a day, without being Taehyung." Jimin started crying quietly. Then he sobbed. The judge called a brief recess. In the hallway, Jimin leaned against the marble pillar, breath shaking. "I'm not okay," he said to no one in particular. Taehyung came to stand beside him. So did Jungkook. "You're not supposed to be," Taehyung said. Jimin turned to him, eyes red. "Do you think we'll win?" "I think," Taehyung said slowly, "that they're more afraid of us now than we ever were of them." When they returned to court, something unexpected happened. Ms. Seo stood and made a request. "We would like to call one final witness. A person whose testimony may clarify the defendant's motives and the plaintiff's conduct." The judge frowned. "Is this witness under subpoena?" "No," Seo said, "but they requested to speak." "Who is it?" There was a pause. And then the door opened. Namjoon walked in. The courtroom gasped. Even Mr. Kwon flinched. Namjoon hadn't spoken publicly in over a year. He had remained silent during the scandal, kept out of the broadcasts, unseen in every press release. Until now. He took the witness stand, raised his right hand, swore the oath, and then he looked at the jury. "At some point," Namjoon said, voice calm, "we stopped being artists, and we became property." His words sliced the silence open like a blade. "I watched each of my brothers break in different ways. I saw the sparkle leave their eyes. I watched Hybe try to control the oxygen in every room we entered." He turned toward the bench. "They asked me to be quiet, to walk away, and I did. But silence is a form of consent, and I refused to give it anymore." Jungkook felt his breath return. Taehyung closed his eyes. Jimin cried again. Namjoon wasn't done. He pulled out a document. "My contract renegotiation. The one they forced me to sign before I left." He placed it before the judge. "Read the redacted clause. Section 12. C." The judge adjusted her glasses, and then her eyes widened. She looked at Mr. Kwon. "Is this accurate?" Kwon looked like he had swallowed acid. "Your Honor, we object to this being introduced without—" "Answer the question." Kwon hesitated, then nodded once. The courtroom erupted, because the clause proved it all. Hybe had built contractual silence into their exits. NDAs masked as career planning. Mental health clauses rewritten as performance liabilities. And there, in black ink, it said, "Artist shall refrain from making any statements, public or private, which may expose internal strategic operations, including emotional response management, mental health restructuring protocols, or contract expectation simulations." The judge banged the gavel. "Order?" Namjoon looked at his brothers one last time before stepping down. "I'm sorry it took me this long." Taehyung shook his head. "You're right on time." Outside, the world watched, and inside, the jury began to deliberate. But before the court adjourned, the judge spoke once more. "This trial will continue tomorrow, and we will reach a decision." She paused. "But it's clear this case is no longer just about contracts. It's about truth." And for the first time, the courtroom applauded. They arrived before the sun did. The courthouse gates were already swarmed by the time Jungkook stepped out of the van. Fans, journalists, protesters, believers, deniers. The sidewalk throbbed with tension, cell phone lights blinking like distant stars, as dozens of people tried to capture the moment he walked up the marble stairs alone at first, until Taehyung and Jimin joined him. There was no security this time. None of the tailored protection that had been afforded to them back when they were the crown jewels of Hybe. Now, the air buzzed with a different kind of electricity. Some armies cheered. Others cried. One held a sign that read, "You didn't betray us." They did. Jungkook didn't wave. He couldn't. His hands were cold, unmoving. The courtroom felt heavier than it ever had. Each creak of the wooden pews, each sigh from the gallery, every shift of the judge's robes echoed louder than it should have. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The jury filed in. 12 strangers. 12 people who'd been entrusted with the power to decide whether the truth was lawful or punishable. Jimin's fingers dug into the bench. Taehyung stared straight ahead, lips barely parted. Namjoon sat a few rows behind them, his face unreadable. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The clerk asked the question that would end everything. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" The woman in the gray suit stood. Her voice didn't tremble. "We have, Your Honor." Jungkook's heartbeat was louder than the gabble that followed. "In the matter of Hybe Corporation versus Jeon Jungkook, Park Jimin, and Kim Taehyung, we the jury find the defendants." A pause. Time stretched thin. Jimin closed his eyes. Not liable. The silence lasted half a second. Then a roar of disbelief and tears and gasps erupted behind them. Some fans burst into quiet sobs. Others clutched one another in relief. Taehyung didn't move, not until Jungkook turned and whispered, "We're free." Then, finally, Taehyung let out the breath he'd been holding for 2 years. But the war wasn't over. The courthouse steps were chaos. Hybe executives disappeared behind blacked-out cars. Their PR team released a brief, sanitized statement. "We respect the court's decision and will continue to support all artists in our family." It meant nothing, because in the background of it all, something darker was rising. A fracture. Not in the company, in the fandom. What had once been a unified front, millions of voices strong, had split. Some believed the trial was a betrayal. Others called it salvation. Some blamed Hybe. Others blamed Taehyung. And then, as hashtags waged war in every time zone, screenshots began to spread. It started small, an anonymous post, a quote attributed to Yoongi. No context, just words. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they didn't care who got burned. Jungkook's phone buzzed violently. Dozens of notifications, mentions, articles. Jimin stormed into the apartment later that night, phone in hand. He didn't say that. He wouldn't. Taehyung looked up from the floor, where he'd been sitting cross-legged beside a stack of unopened letters. "Are you sure?" Jimin froze, then slowly sat down. The room went quiet again. For hours, they stayed there, in the darkened apartment, as the internet spun theories faster than they could breathe. It wasn't until the next morning that a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. No logo. Just a black envelope slipped under the door. Taehyung found it first. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Yoongi's. He didn't open it right away. His fingers shook. Jungkook sat beside him, and together, they read it. "Dear brothers, you'll never know how long it took me to write this. Because I've always believed in silence. Not out of fear, but because I thought silence was strength. I thought the best way to protect you was to stay out of the fire. Let it burn around you. Let me take the heat from the shadows. But I failed you. I thought by staying behind the curtain, I could keep them from hurting you further. But they hurt you anyway. And now the world thinks I said something I didn't. I never betrayed you. I never betrayed us. But I also wasn't brave enough to join you. When Taehyung disappeared, I knew something was wrong. I asked questions. I was warned. I was told to keep quiet. That if I kept producing, if I kept my head down, everything would settle. The chaos would pass. But it didn't. Because you didn't. And I'm proud of you for that. I'm proud that you burned down the stage they built to trap you. And if this is the end of BTS as we knew it, let it be the beginning of something that isn't fake. I'll speak soon. For now, stay alive. Yoongi. Taehyung read it 3 times before folding it neatly. Then he stood. "We need to talk to him." Jungkook nodded, but Jimin was silent because his phone had just buzzed. An anonymous tip, a voice note. He played it. A recording, a conversation between Seokjin and someone else. The voice wasn't clear, but the words were. "You don't need to worry about them anymore. We'll isolate Jimin first. Jungkook will break on his own. Taehyung. Well, we already wrote his ending." Jimin dropped the phone. Taehyung stared at it. "Play that again?" Jimin shook his head, voice breaking. "No, not yet." Jungkook stepped forward. "You think this is?" "I think," Jimin said slowly, "there's one person left in this group who hasn't spoken at all." Jungkook's blood turned to ice. Hoseok. J-Hope. The bright one. The glue. The one who smiled when everyone else shattered. He had stayed silent through the broadcasts, the trial, the verdict. And now, with everything out, he was still nowhere to be seen. Jimin whispered, "If he's behind this." Taehyung didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out at the sky. "I don't think he's the villain," he said softly. "I think he's the last secret." He had been hiding in plain sight. In a modest apartment in Mapo-gu, just a few subway stops from the high building, Hoseok J-Hope watched the world unravel from the safety of silence. The curtains in his living room never opened past noon. His phone was turned off unless he absolutely needed it. He hadn't responded to a single message from the group in months. Not after the first broadcast, not after the trial, not even after Taehyung's letter went viral. And yet, he knew everything. He watched, listened, waited. Because unlike the others, Hoseok hadn't just been threatened. He had been forced to choose. It happened quietly, months before Taehyung's disappearance. A private meeting in a soundproof room with 2 senior executives and a legal advisor who never introduced herself. They sat him down, handed him a folder, and showed him the numbers. They called it asset preservation strategy. But what it really was control. "We're not asking you to betray anyone," one of the execs had said, smiling thinly. "We're simply asking you to be reasonable. Stay quiet. Focus on your solo work. We'll protect you. And we'll protect the brand." He remembered staring at the folder without opening it. He remembered wondering whether protection was the same thing as silence. He remembered saying yes, and hating himself for it ever since. But now, everything had changed. Jungkook, Jimin, Taehyung, and Namjoon had burned the entire machine down. Yoongi had sent a letter that cracked open the armor Hoseok had spent years wrapping around his heart.